good evening, or perhaps good night. We are about to embark on a journey, a very, very slow journey, back to a time and a place that was anything but slow. Ancient Rome. Tonight, we won't be focusing on the triumphs, the emperors, or the epic battles. Instead, we will be exploring the small, quiet, and often repetitive routines that made up the mundane reality of the Roman day. We will be seeking the comfort in the constant, the calming repetition of history itself. Our goal is not excitement, but a deep, historical tranquility. Close your eyes, or simply let your gaze soften. We are going to begin at the very start of the day. Imagine yourself in the heart of the city, the air still cool and heavy with the smell of wood smoke, old wine, and the ever-present Tiber. The hour is late, or rather, very early. We are somewhere between the prima hora and the secunda hora, the first 2 hours of daylight in Rome, where time was measured from sunrise. This could be anywhere between 4:30 a.m. and 6:30 a.m., depending on the season. The exactitude is not important. What is important is the gentle, gradual shift from nox, the night, to dies, the day. The dawn chorus, noise, light, and waking up. Ancient Rome was a city defined by noise. It was a cacophony of life, and this noise began long before the sun fully cleared the horizon. For the vast majority of Romans living in multi-story apartment buildings, the insulae, the first sign of morning, was the sound filtering up from the street. Imagine the thickness of the insula walls, often thin, poorly constructed, and offering little insulation against the world outside. The sleeping Roman, perhaps lying on a simple straw-filled mattress or a more comfortable feather bed for the wealthier, would first hear the shouts of vendors. Not the full market roar, but the early, insistent cries of those setting up their stalls or selling simple, necessary goods. The water carrier clattering his empty clay jars. The baker already pushing his small cart of panis quadratus, the standard four-lobed Roman bread, ready for the morning rush. The insistent braying of a donkey, hauling supplies from the countryside. These were the sounds that replaced the silence of the contubernium, the collective slumber of the household. Now, consider the light. There were no bright electric lights to jar the eyes. The transition from dark to light was an organic, slow process. If you were a member of a wealthy household, the domus, your bedroom might have a small window, perhaps covered with a thin sheet of mica or glass, or simply a wooden shutter. The first light was the lumen matutinum, the morning glow. It was a soft, diffuse light that struggled to penetrate the high, heavy houses. This light was often accompanied by the subtle, flickering, artificial light of a lucerna, an oil lamp, being lit by a slave in the antechamber. This was the signal. The dominus, the master of the house, was expected to rise and prepare for the day's obligations. The city was stirring, and so too must he. This initial stirring was not a hurried dash. It was a slow, deliberate stretching. The Roman day was structured, and the beginning of it was a ritual in itself. The master's first moments, toga and tunica. The clothing of the Roman was both practical and highly symbolic. Upon rising, the first item of clothing was the tunica. This was a simple wool or linen garment, much like a long, sleeveless t-shirt, reaching down to the knees for men, or to the ankles for women. It was the garment of comfort, of the private sphere. For the dominus, the master of the household, A slave would be waiting nearby, perhaps having slept on the floor of the room or in a small adjoining chamber. His task was to assist with the most critical part of the morning toilet, the toga. The toga was the symbol of Roman citizenship, a heavy, semicircular piece of white wool, often 6 meters long. It was cumbersome, hot, and impractical, but its wearing was a necessity for any public life. Imagine the scene. The slave, with practiced, silent movements, begins the draping process. The tunica is already on. Now, the toga's voluminous folds must be arranged. The first section is brought over the left shoulder, draped across the back, and then pulled under the right arm. It is then brought back over the chest and finally thrown over the left shoulder again. The process, known as cingere togum, or girding the toga, was an art form. It required patience and precision to achieve the perfect, majestic folds, the sinus and the umbo that spoke of wealth, status, and sobriety. For the wealthy Roman, this slow dressing ritual was a meditative start to the day, a moment to transition from the private relaxation of otium to the public business of negotium. This careful preparation was a signal to the world. A Roman citizen is ready to be seen. Let us continue our slow descent into the routine of the Roman morning. We left the master of the house, the dominus, having just completed the elaborate, time-consuming ritual of donning the toga. He is now officially prepared for the public eye, his status announced by the very folds of his garment. But before the master can leave his private quarters, there is a fundamental human need that must be addressed: the Roman toilet or ablutions. This, too, was a matter dependent entirely on social status and wealth. The Roman toilet and hygiene. For the average Roman living in an insula, the morning toilet was a very simple, often rushed affair. There was usually no running water within the apartment itself. Water had to be carried up from a public fountain, the fons or lacus, often by a slave or a member of the family. A simple splash of cold water to the face and hands was the extent of the washing. The matter of sanitation was equally communal. For those in insulae, a trip to the local public latrines was a common morning routine. These were often grand communal halls with rows of seats built over running water. It was a social occasion, a place to exchange the first gossip of the day. Imagine the scene: a cool, damp room, the sound of continuously running water beneath the marble benches, and the hushed early morning greetings exchanged between neighbors. For our dominus, residing in his private domus, the experience was vastly different, though still simple by modern standards. He would have access to a small private washing area, perhaps a basin of water brought to him by a slave. Romans did not use soap as we know it. Instead, oil, often scented, would be applied to the body, then scraped off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. The focus of the morning was not on thorough bathing. That was reserved for the afternoon trip to the Thermae, the public baths. The morning was about presentation, the shaving of the beard, the arrangement of the hair, and the application of a few drops of perfume, all performed with the meticulous, practiced assistance of a personal slave. The smooth chin, the styled hair, the pure white toga, these were essential for the business that lay ahead. The first meal, ientaculum. With the toilette complete, the Roman citizen was ready for the first taste of the day, ientaculum. Unlike modern society, the Roman morning meal was often a quick, minimal affair, sometimes skipped entirely. It was not the social center of the day. The main meals were the prandium, a light midday meal, and the Cena, the main dinner. Ientaculum was practical sustenance. It might consist of a piece of last night's cold leftovers, a piece of bread, perhaps dipped in wine or olive oil, sometimes dried fruit like dates, or a handful of olives. The preferred beverage was simply water, or possibly a small cup of wine cut heavily with water. The dominus would eat this standing up quickly, perhaps while reviewing the day's schedule with his chief slave. The speed was essential, for the clock was ticking towards the most important social event of the entire morning, the Salutatio anticipation, the coming of the clients. The Salutatio, or the greeting, was the cornerstone of the morning for any ambitious Roman. It was a formal, ritualized audience held by the patronus, the patron, for his clients, the clients. It was an exchange of loyalty and service for protection and financial aid. This system, known as patronage, was the invisible structure holding Roman society together. As the dominus finished his simple ientaculum, the front door of the domus would already be buzzing. Outside, a crowd was gathering. These were his clients, men and sometimes women of lower status, perhaps freedmen, small business owners, or even poorer knights, all seeking the attention and assistance of their powerful patron. Imagine the atmosphere outside the fosses, the narrow entrance hall of the domus. It is still early, the air is cold, but the crowd is growing denser. The clients jostle quietly, each one hoping to be noticed. The most eager ones would have arrived before dawn, securing a favorable spot near the entrance. They whisper amongst themselves, checking their own togas, which, for a client, was often a second-hand and much less grand affair. The entire household is now mobilized. Slaves stand guard at the door, tasked with verifying the identity of the clients and ensuring that the most important ones, those of higher status, are allowed in first. This queuing process was itself a public declaration of the social hierarchy. A man's importance could be measured by how quickly he was admitted to his patron's house for the salutatio. The dominus, standing inside the atrium, the great central hall, waits. The noise from the street is now a muffled, insistent murmur. The ritual is about to begin. The fate of many people, their livelihoods, their legal battles, their political futures, rests on the few brief minutes they will spend in the presence of their patron. The hour is now the secunda or tertia hora, the second or third hour of the day. The sun is fully above the horizon, and the light now penetrates the atrium of the domus, illuminating the crowd of hopeful clients. We stand at the threshold of the Salutatio, the ritual that cemented the bonds of Roman power and dependency. The entrance into the atrium. The signal is given. The slaves stationed at the door begin to admit the clients. The entrance is a carefully orchestrated process designed to maximize the patron's prestige and the client's deference. Imagine walking into the atrium. The first sensation is the contrast between the dusty, noisy street and the relative coolness and grandeur of the inner hall. The atrium itself is impressive, often decorated with ancestral busts, the imagines, which silently proclaimed the family's long, distinguished history. The centerpiece is the impluvium, a shallow pool designed to collect rainwater from the opening in the roof. The compluvium. The sound of water, perhaps dripping gently into the pool, adds a cool, echoing quality to the low murmur of the crowd. The clients move quickly, but respectfully. They approach the patronus, who is standing in a prominent position. perhaps near a small altar dedicated to the household gods, the lares and penates. The interaction is extremely brief. The goal is efficiency, as hundreds of clients might pass through in a short span of time. The client approaches, bows his head, and offers a formal, deferential greeting. He uses the required formula, "Salve patron." Greetings, patron. The patron, in turn, offers a reserved yet acknowledging nod. He might address the client by name if the client is particularly important, or if he is simply a low-status individual whose presence is merely a numerical asset. The exchange of the sportula. For many clients, the primary purpose of this hurried appearance was not consultation or advice, but the receipt of the sportula. The sportula was a small, practical handout, originally a basket, sportula, containing food. By the time of the empire, it had often transitioned into a small sum of money, a few denarii or sestertii. For a very poor client or a freedman, this sportula was a critical source of daily income. It was enough to buy a few loaves of bread or a share of cheap wine for the day. For the patron, it was a relatively small price to pay for a massive return, social visibility and political influence. A large crowd of clients presenting themselves for the Salutatio was a public, undeniable measure of a patron's importance. The more clients he had, the more power he was perceived to possess, and the more influence he could wield in the forum or the senate. The clients were, in essence, a visible retinue, a living form of advertisement. Imagine the quiet, almost mechanical efficiency of the exchange. The client offers his greeting. A designated slave of the patron steps forward and hands the client a small pouch or a specific token amount of cash. The exchange is completed in mere seconds. The client then immediately turns and exits the house. He cannot linger. The line is long, and the patron's time is precious. A quick word of business. For a small, select group of higher status clients, perhaps a skilled lawyer, a wealthy merchant, or an ambitious young politician, the Salutatio involved a bit more than a quick handout. These clients were allowed to linger, or even granted a brief, private audience with the patron in a back room. They might discuss a complex legal case that the patron's influence could assist with, a debt that needed settling, or a financial investment, political maneuvering for upcoming elections or senatorial votes. For these individuals, the Salutatio was true networking. It was the moment they presented a specific request, officium, to their patron, fulfilling their reciprocal duty to him. The patron would listen, perhaps offering a vague promise or a firm commitment, and then dismiss them to prepare for his own departure. By the time the last client has been hurried out, the first few hours of the Roman day have been spent entirely on the negotiation of social status. The patronus is now fueled by a meager breakfast, dressed impeccably and politically charged. The entire ritual of the Salutatio has served its primary purpose, to remind everyone, from the lowliest freedman to the patron himself, precisely where they stood in the rigid, vertical hierarchy of Rome. The morning's work is done, and the real work is about to begin. With the Salutatio complete, the domus becomes quiet once more. The sound of hundreds of footsteps shuffling across the stone floor has faded, replaced by the persistent, muffled roar of the city outside. It is time for the patronus to leave his private world and step into the public sphere, the forum, the senate, or his place of business. This journey out into the heart of Rome was not a solitary one. It was another meticulously planned ritual designed to display power and wealth. The procession, leaving the Domus. The Roman elite did not simply walk out the door. They moved in a small yet significant procession. This was another opportunity to impress and assert dominance. Leading the way would be several slaves, often called pedisequi, or foot followers. Their duties were varied: clearing the path. In the dense, chaotic streets of Rome, a slave would often move ahead, shouting warnings or physically pushing aside commoners, ensuring the master did not have to slow his pace or soil his immaculate white toga. Carrying documents. The day's schedule, tablets or scrolls relevant to his business, legal briefs, political pamphlets, or personal correspondence, would be carried by an educated slave, perhaps a librarius or secretary. Symbolic display. The mere sight of a large retinue of slaves was a powerful visual cue of the patron's economic and social status. Crucially, the patron might also be followed by a few of his more important clients who had been granted the favor of accompanying him. To walk beside or even just behind the patron on his way to the forum was a highly valued distinction, signaling one's closeness to power. Imagine the patron stepping out, tall, impeccably dressed, surrounded by a protective bubble of attendants. His gait is deliberate and unhurried, projecting an aura of confidence and authority that the accompanying slaves work diligently to maintain. Navigating the street chaos. Stepping from the quiet shelter of the Domus into the Roman street was an immediate, jarring sensory overload. Noise. The volume instantly spikes. The street noise that was a distant hum is now a deafening, localized assault. Cartwheels grinding against cobblestones, the shouts of teamsters urging their mules, the insistent hawkers selling hot chickpeas or sausages, and the ceaseless clamor of people arguing, negotiating, and simply moving. Smell. The Roman streets were notoriously pungent. Alongside the wood smoke and wine, there was the smell of unwashed humanity, waste spilling from upper-story windows, a constant hazard, refuse piled in corners, and the pervasive odor of the public cookshops, the thermopolia. Traffic. During the hours of daylight, the movement of private carriages and heavy delivery carts was often restricted within the city walls to ease congestion. This law, often attributed to Julius Caesar, meant that the early morning street was dominated by foot traffic and smaller, lighter vehicles. However, the chaos of people, slaves running errands, shopkeepers opening their stalls, soldiers marching, was inescapable. The Dominus and his entourage were forced to weave through the crowd, relying on the slaves to keep the way clear. The role of the Thermopolium. As we move through the streets, we pass by the numerous thermopolia, the places where hot things are sold. These were the fast food joints of ancient Rome, recognizable by their marble counters with built-in earthenware jars, or dolia, which kept food warm. For the common Roman, the thermopolium was a lifeline. They provided simple, hot meals for those who had no cooking facilities in their cramped insula apartments. Food items might include porridge, pulse, lentils, beans, or cheap stewed meat. It offered a place for a quick, standing breakfast for the clients who had just received their sportula cash and needed to quickly convert it into energy for the day's labor. The wealthy patron, shielded by his slaves, would pass by these establishments, perhaps with a slight curl of the lip, but their very existence was vital to the functioning of the city. The Thermopolia allowed the vast working population of Rome to quickly refuel and get to the docks, the workshops, or the construction sites, ensuring the continuous, churning engine of Roman commerce never stopped. The energy of the city was now fully awakened. The journey through the narrow, crowded streets eventually brings the Patronus and his entourage to the sprawling, echoing space that is the very nerve center of the Roman world, the Roman Forum. We have now arrived at the peak of the morning's activity, the Forum at the third hour. The Forum, even early in the day, was a spectacle of human activity. Imagine stepping from the tight confines of the street into this wide, open space. The sunlight is now stronger, reflecting off the white marble temples and basilicas. The air is still charged with the energy of thousands of Romans, but the noise here is different. It is less chaotic and more purposeful, a loud, collective hum of commerce and politics. The Forum was not just one location. It was a cluster of specialized areas, each dedicated to a critical function of Roman life. In the morning, it was primarily a place of negotium, of business, legal proceedings, and statecraft. The personal social duties of the Salutatio are over. Now the public duties begin. As the Patronus arrives, he moves with a clear sense of direction. He is not here to loiter or shop. He is here to perform the essential duties of his rank. The courts and legal proceedings. For many wealthy and influential Romans, the main morning commitment was to the basilicas, the large covered public halls surrounding the Forum. These structures were the courthouses of Rome, and legal proceedings began early. A Patronus might be attending the basilica for several reasons. Pleading a case. As an advocate or lawyer, arguing on behalf of a client. This was a common duty owed to one's clients and a powerful way to demonstrate influence. The Patronus would often rely on his memory and rhetorical skill, as trials were fast-paced and relied heavily on oral argument. Witnessing a case, observing a trial involving a family member or a business associate. Acting as a judge. For those holding certain magistracies, sitting on a bench to hear cases was a daily responsibility. Imagine the atmosphere inside the basilica. The high ceiling creates a cool, slightly darkened space. The air smells of dust and human anticipation. The noise of the Forum is slightly muffled, but the voices of the orators are loud, projected across the crowd of observers and the nervous clients awaiting judgment. The rhetoric is precise, passionate, and deliberately dramatic. This is where the real power of the Roman elite was wielded. The decisions made here, from property disputes to criminal accusations, determined the wealth, freedom, and sometimes the very life of the common Roman. The gathering of the Senate. If our Patronus held the rank of a senator, his morning would be anchored by the Curia Hostilia, the Senate House, located on the edge of the Forum. Senatorial sessions also began early. The morning was the most productive time before the midday heat and the later focus on relaxation and meals. Attending the Senate meant engaging in the highest level of Roman politics, debating foreign policy and war, managing state finances and provinces, drafting laws and issuing decrees. The scene inside the Curia was one of profound formality. Senators, all dressed in the toga praetexta, the toga with a purple border denoting senatorial rank, would gather. The atmosphere was often tense, filled with careful political maneuvering, whispered negotiations, and the rhythmic, formal declarations of opinions. For the serious Roman politician, this was the central purpose of the morning, the service to the state, the res publica. Whether in the basilica or the curia, the Roman was engaged in intense cognitive labor, the labor of persuasion, influence, and decision-making. This demanding work would typically occupy the entire morning, driving towards a natural break as the sun reached its zenith. We have passed through the initial rush of the Salutatio and the intense legal and political maneuvering in the Forum. The Roman morning, the period dedicated to negotium, is now drawing to a close. The sun is high overhead. Depending on the season, this is around the sexta hora, the 6th hour, midday. This marks a crucial point in the Roman day, the transition from the frantic pace of public life to the necessary relaxation of private life. The demanding work is intentionally structured to conclude at this point. The midday meal, prandium. The first task after the cessation of business was the prandium, the midday meal. This was not the grand, formal dinner, the Cena, which was reserved for the evening. Prandium was a simple, light, and private affair. It served as a quick refueling stop, an intermission before the afternoon's activities. For the wealthy patronus, this meal might take place at his domus, or he might simply dispatch a slave to bring food to his office or a quiet corner near the Forum. What would this light meal typically consist of? Cold cuts, perhaps some preserved meats like ham or sausages. Vegetables, simple raw vegetables often accompanied by oil and vinegar. Cheese and bread, the staple diet of the Roman citizen. Wine, again wine cut heavily with water, sufficient to quench thirst without inducing drowsiness. The prandium was typically eaten quickly and informally, perhaps standing or sitting on a simple stool. There was no elaborate table setting, no reclining on couches, and certainly no lengthy social conversation. It was a purely functional meal designed to maintain energy until the main event of the evening. The great shift from toil to relaxation. Following the prandium, the entire rhythm of Roman life slowed down dramatically. The heat of the midday sun, particularly in the summer months, made strenuous activity unpleasant and inefficient. This period was known as the time for odium, or leisure. This concept of leisure, however, was not one of complete idleness. It was a shift from politically demanding or financially critical work to pursuits that nourished the mind and body. It often included rest and reading, a short period of rest, perhaps a brief nap, or quietly reviewing scrolls and documents. Study. For the educated elite, this was a perfect time for philosophical discussion, private tutoring, or writing letters and treatises. The Roman afternoon was dedicated to self-improvement and physical well-being, but all of these activities were merely a prelude to the destination that defined the Roman afternoon, the public baths. The call of the Thermae. The public baths, the Thermae, were far more than just a place to get clean. They were the true social, recreational, and physical heart of Roman daily life, arguably even more important than the Forum itself for the average citizen. As the sun began its gentle descent toward the west, the patronus and many thousands of other Romans, men, women, children, rich, poor, free, and slave, would begin to gravitate toward the vast, steaming complex of the local bathhouse. For the wealthy, the journey to the baths was, like the morning commute, a slow, deliberate procession. But the destination offered a promise of profound relief. The washing away of the city's dust, the exhaustion of the morning's work, and the shedding of the constricting, symbolic layers of the toga. The heavy woolen garment would finally be replaced by the soft linen of the bath towel. The formal demeanor would give way to comfortable, almost childlike relaxation. The afternoon was truly about to begin. The sun is now past its highest point, and the great public baths, the Thermae, are swelling with the city's population. We now enter the vast, magnificent complex, a place where social barriers for a few hours felt less rigid than anywhere else in Rome. The first sensation upon entering the Thermae is the sound. It is a loud, echoing symphony of Roman life, described vividly even by ancient writers like Seneca, who lived above a bathhouse and complained about the endless noise. The splash of water, both hot and cold. The shouts of vendors selling drinks, snacks, and even body scrapers. The deep groan of a man exercising with heavy weights in the palestra. The rhythmic slap of the masseur's hand against skin. The high-pitched, insistent cry of a hair plucker. The apoditerium and the palestra. The first room encountered is the apoditerium, the changing room. Here, the Roman citizen sheds the symbolic weight of his toga and his morning responsibilities. He wraps himself in a simple towel or lightweight linen garment. His clothes are entrusted to a slave, the capsarius, who guards them against the ever-present threat of theft. Next, it was customary to engage in some form of physical exercise in the palestra, the open-air exercise yard attached to the baths. This was not always serious athletics. It might involve a light game of ball called pila, simple jogging or stretching, wading in a small, cool pool to relax the muscles. The Romans believed in exercising before bathing, warming the body up through exertion, not just steam. This physical activity was essential for clearing the mind and preparing the muscles for the deep relaxation to come. The goal was to work up a light sweat, ensuring the skin was ready for the oils and the scraper. The sequence of heat, caldarium and tepidarium. With the body warm, the bather would proceed into the sequence of heated rooms. First often was the tepidarium, the warm room. This was an intermediate space, designed to acclimatize the body to the heat. It was humid, comfortable, and often beautifully decorated. The air here was gentle, not yet intense, making it a perfect spot for quiet conversation, a space for socializing and networking with less formality than the morning salutatio. The crucial step for purification was the caldarium, the hot room. This was the most intense space, heated by the hypocaust system, an underfloor furnace that circulated hot air beneath the floor and through flues in the walls. Imagine the heat, thick, moist air, steam rising from the large hot water basin, the alveus. The heat is so intense that water constantly streams down the walls. The Roman would sit or stand here, sweating profusely. The pores open, and the day's grime and dust are expelled. A slave would apply olive oil to the skin, massaging the muscles to loosen them. After a thorough application of oil and sweat, the bather would use the strigil, that curved metal scraper we mentioned earlier, to scrape the mixture of oil, sweat, and dirt from the skin. The feeling was immensely refreshing, leaving the skin smooth and clean. The final shock, frigidarium. The final essential stage was the transition to the frigidarium, the cold room. This was the largest, grandest room, housing a large, deep pool of cold water. the natatio. Stepping from the intense, humid heat of the caldarium into the cool, sharp air of the frigidarium was a deliberate shock to the system. The cold water instantly closed the pores, energized the body, and served as the physical capstone to the relaxation process. A quick plunge, a swim, or simply standing in the cool, clear water completed the purification ritual. The Roman citizen leaves the baths not just clean, but physically and mentally restored. The anxieties of the morning's legal battles and political conflicts are momentarily washed away. With the sun beginning to sink lower, it is now time to prepare for the final, most important event of the day, the evening meal, the Cena. Leaving the steaming, echoing warmth of the Thermae, the Roman citizen returns to his domus. The light outside is now soft and golden. The octava hora, or nona hora, the 8th or 9th hour, the intense sun has faded, and a calm descends upon the city, marking the end of the public day and the beginning of the private, social evening. The main focus of the evening is the Cena, the Roman dinner. This was the meal. It was the event that defined the Roman social calendar, lasting for hours and often extending late into the night. It was the complete opposite of the hurried, functional ientaculum and prandium of the day. The setting, the triclinium. The Cena took place in the triclinium, the dining room, a space dedicated entirely to conviviality. The arrangement of this room immediately signaled the formality and leisure of the event. Instead of sitting at chairs and a table, guests reclined on sloping couches, the lecti triclinares. These were typically arranged in a U shape around a central low table. Each couch held 3 people, allowing for the traditional number of 9 guests, a number considered perfect for ensuring both intimate conversation and sufficient service. Imagine the scene. The room is lit by multiple oil lamps, casting long, flickering shadows on the walls. The air is scented with cooking spices and perfumes. Slaves move quietly, placing elaborate silver and pottery tableware. The act of reclining was deeply symbolic. It represented odium in its purest form, a total relaxation, a freedom from the stiff, upright posture required by the toga and the business of the forum. The formal structure of the Cena. The Cena followed a strict tripartite structure, stretching the meal out over several hours of conversation and indulgence. 1. Gustatio, appetizers. This was the opening course, designed to stimulate the appetite. It often included light, refreshing dishes, eggs, salads, shellfish, olives, and perhaps simple pastries. The beverage of choice for the start was mulsum, a sweet wine mixed with honey, intended to warm the stomach. 2. Primae mensae, main course. This was the heart of the meal, consisting of heavier, richer dishes. Depending on the wealth of the host, this could range from simple pork and beans to extravagant roasts, fowl, and exotic seafood. The presentation was often as important as the taste. 3rd secundae mensae, desserts. The final course was a collection of sweets, fruits, nuts, dried dates, figs, and rich pastries. This signaled the transition from the structured meal to the commissatio, the formal drinking party that followed. Throughout the meal, a host of specialized slaves would attend to the guests, carving the meat, refilling the wine, and even entertaining with music or poetry readings. The social importance of conviviality. The Cena was far more than just eating. It was a carefully curated social experience where the rules of the morning's salutatio were reversed. Equality, temporary. While hierarchy always existed, The atmosphere of the Cena was supposed to be one of conviviality and mutual respect. Patrons dined with their equals, friends, and trusted subordinates. Conversation. This was the time for free-flowing discussion. Philosophy, literature, the latest city gossip, or the details of the day's events. Unlike the formal requests of the morning, this conversation was meant to be enjoyable, witty, and stimulating. As the evening deepened, the focus shifted entirely to conversation and wine. The long, slow pace of the dinner, accompanied by the gentle glow of the lamps, was the ultimate signal that the demands of the day were fully concluded. Sleep, the final retreat from Rome, was approaching slowly but surely. The Cena has concluded. The main dishes have been cleared, and the remnants of the sweet second-day mensae remain. The atmosphere in the triclinium shifts from dining to dedicated drinking, a phase known as the commissatio. The commissatio, drinking and conversation. The commissatio was a structured drinking party where wine was consumed, often in large quantities, but always diluted with water. Drinking wine neat, undiluted, was considered barbaric and uncivilized, a hallmark of foreign excess. The control of the commissatio often fell to a designated master of the feast, or arbiter bibendi. This individual was chosen by the rolling of dice, and his job was to determine the strength of the wine mixture and the number of cups each guest was expected to drink. This playful yet formal control ensured that the conversation remained lively and philosophical rather than descending into complete chaos, at least ideally. The conversation now slows down, becoming deeper, more contemplative. The dim light of the lamps, the warmth of the room, and the gentle effects of the diluted wine combine to create a profound sense of ease. Guests are truly at rest, their minds free from the burdens of negotium and the constant posturing required by the Roman day. As the hours grow later, the first guests begin to take their leave. The departures are quiet, signaled by the host's solemn nod. The slaves are called to assist the departing guests, providing torches or guiding them through the quiet, darkened streets. Preparing for sleep. The night rituals. Finally, the host and his immediate family are left alone. The day, which began with the hurried dressing of the toga and the chaotic rush of the Salutatio, ends with a slow, deliberate winding down. The formal garments are removed. The tight, heavy woolen layers are replaced by the simple, soft linen of the subligaculum, undergarment, and the comfortable vestis dormitoria, sleeping tunic. The dominus sheds his public persona entirely, becoming simply a man seeking rest. There are small, final rituals that prepare the body for the long night. Foot washing. Slaves would bring warm water to wash the feet of the master. A great relief after a day spent walking the forum's stone floors. Oil lamps, the lucernae, oil lamps, are systematically extinguished. This is not a sudden switch, but a slow, gradual descent into darkness. The only light remaining is perhaps a small, sputtering lamp left in the entryway or the slave quarters to ward off bad spirits and provide a minimal source of navigation. The silence of the night. As the last lamp is snuffed out, the domus is enveloped in a profound darkness. In the city of Rome, the night, the nox, was often the only time that silence truly reigned. The carts and traffic, restricted by law, are gone. The noisy vendors are asleep in their cramped quarters. The silence that settles is deep and heavy, broken only by the distant, occasional cry of a watchman or the howl of a dog. The Roman citizen retires to his bedroom, the cubiculum. He lies down on his bed, the straw-stuffed mattress rustling softly, or perhaps sinking into a softer feather bed. His head rests on a simple pillow. He closes his eyes, surrounded by the cool stone of the domus, the long day of public duty, the early morning rush, the political fights, the cleansing steam of the baths, and the conviviality of the Cena, all fade away into the quiet darkness. The body, exhausted by the cycle of the Roman routine, succumbs to the final necessity. He is ready to sleep. And in the morning, the exact, slow, repetitive cycle will begin again. We rest now in the deep, profound silence of the Roman night. The long day, stretching from the chill of the prima hora to the deep darkness of the median nox, has finally drawn to a close. Let us take a moment to briefly review the careful sequence of this ancient life, a pattern repeated thousands of times across the centuries, offering a profound sense of constancy. It began with the rude awakening by the noise of the early street, followed by the careful, symbolic dressing of the tunica and the heavy toga. The day immediately leaped into social obligation with the hurried exchange of loyalty and subsidy during the Salutatio, where the patronus asserted his power and the clientes fulfilled their duty, receiving the critical sportula. This public duty, the negotium, then led to the packed, noisy, and argumentative heart of the city, the forum and the basilicas, where Roman life was governed by law and rhetoric. By midday, the heat forced a retreat. The quick, functional prandium provided energy for the great transition to relaxation. The afternoon was given over entirely to the body and the mind, centered around the social crucible of the Thermae. We saw the cycle of heat and cold, the tepidarium, the caldarium, the frigidarium, washing away the physical and mental stress of the morning. Finally, the evening brought the shift from public duty to private pleasure. The multi-course, hours-long Cena and the quiet, formal drinking of the commissatio provided the ultimate decompression, preparing the body for rest and the mind for philosophical ease, the comfort of the cycle. And now, as we lie here in the darkness of the cubiculum, we realize that the true comfort of this historical journey lies in the absolute certainty of the cycle. The Roman day was not a series of random events. It was a perfectly structured routine, where every action had a counterpoint, every effort had a release, and every period of noise was compensated by a period of quiet. The chaos of the forum was countered by the tranquility of the Thermae. The hurried demand of the Salutatio was compensated by the slow leisure of the Cena tonight. We too have been taken through this cycle, allowing the steady, deliberate rhythm of history to slow our own minds. The details of Roman life, the folds of the toga, the drip of water in the impluvium, the scraping of the strigil, have served as small, repetitive anchors, pulling us away from the demands of the modern world. The city outside is silent. The sounds of the forum, the shouts of the vendors, the clatter of the chariots, they are all gone. There is only the darkness, the quiet breathing of the sleeping household, and the patient, unending wait for the first faint light of the next dawn. Sleep now. Let the deep, profound silence of the Roman night hold you until the prima hora comes again. Thank you for joining us on this slow journey into the past. Good night. If this journey through the duller side of history helped you unwind and maybe even drift off, please let me know. First, hit that like button if you enjoyed this historical lullaby. Second, Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future installments of history too boring to keep you awake. Finally, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below about which historical topic you find so mundane. It deserves to be our next sleepy video. Your suggestions will shape our journey into the world's most delightfully dull past.